Hi, I'm Paul Edwards. I'm a self-published horror author, and first and foremost, a monster kid. Tonight I'm watching The Werewolf of London from 1935, starring Henry Hull and Valerie Hobson. Werewolf mythology is part of the folklore of a number of different countries around the world. But what we think of as the legend of the werewolf is almost completely invented by Hollywood. So let's try something. I'm going to recite for you the legend of the werewolf that we all grew up learning. And you see if you can tell which parts of this were actual folklore and which parts of this were completely invented by Hollywood, okay? A werewolf is a human being who, on the night of the full moon, transforms into a half-human, half-wolf hybrid. The way that a person becomes a werewolf is that whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf themselves on the night of the next full moon. They're infected by the last werewolf, and now they carry the curse. All of this sounds really familiar, doesn't it? How much of that do you think is part of actual folklore? You got it. None. None of that whatsoever is part of any folklore. All of that was invented by Hollywood. First of all, the idea that a werewolf is a half-human, half-wolf hybrid creature walking on two legs, but with wolf face, completely invented by Hollywood. In the myths, a werewolf was just a human being who could transform into a wolf, an ordinary wolf, indistinguishable from any other wolf. And a person was not inflicted with the curse of the werewolf involuntarily. You could only become a werewolf by performing a magic ceremony, by performing witchcraft. And people would voluntarily choose to gain this supernatural power. It had nothing to do with being bitten by the last werewolf. That's completely invented by Hollywood. Also, the idea that moonlight is what transforms a person, completely invented by Hollywood. A person became a werewolf at night. That was true in folklore, but it had nothing to do with the actual moonlight. And it certainly had nothing to do with the moon being full. Most of those tropes were invented by one specific film, The Werewolf of London, 1935. In The Werewolf of London, Henry Hull plays a botanist who travels to Tibet in search of a rare flower that blooms under moonlight rather than sunlight. While there, he's attacked by another werewolf, but he survives. He returns to London with these rare moonflowers and discovers that he now has been inflicted by the curse of the werewolf. Because he was bitten by the last werewolf, he now becomes a man-wolf hybrid at night, walking around upright, wearing clothes just like anybody else, but with a monster face, and also able to speak and to reason like a man. The rival werewolf, the one who bit him, arrives in town in human form, trying to get hold of this rare moonflower, which it turns out is a temporary antidote to the transformation, but not a permanent cure. So a lot was invented in this film that we now think was part of werewolf mythology in the olden times, and it just wasn't. So The Werewolf of London was a very influential film. Unfortunately, it was not a very popular film. It did not go over well. I think one of the main reasons it did not go over well is that the main character, played by Henry Hull, is not a very likable guy at all. He, in human form, he's a reclusive scientist who neglects his wife and has a quick temper and is curt and rude, and he's just a disagreeable guy. They fixed this problem in the next werewolf movie, which was The Wolf Man, 6 years later in 1941. But in Werewolf of London, the main character really was not very likable, and I think that removed an element of sympathy that you might otherwise have felt for the poor guy who is trapped in this terrible curse. The other werewolf, the one who explains to him all the backstory of what's happening to them both, is played by Warner Oland, who we probably remember best as having played Charlie Chan in maybe a dozen or so movies. And the female lead, the wife of the botanist, is played by Valerie Hobson, who had only just finished playing Dr. Frankenstein's wife in Bride of Frankenstein earlier in the same year. So she got to be married to two monsters in the same year. The Werewolf of London did not go over well. Basically what happened was that a few years later, Hollywood decided to rework the same story. You couldn't even call it a reboot because it was more extensive of an overhaul than that. They changed the setting and a lot of the premise of Werewolf of London, but they reworked it into the film that we know as The Wolf Man. The same mythos applied, which had been invented in Werewolf of London. The idea that you get bitten by a werewolf and then you become one. And that's where a lot of the lore entered into popular culture, because The Wolfman was a very popular movie. And I think part of the reason was that Larry Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., the guy who turns into a werewolf, was a very likable guy, as opposed to Henry Hull's character in Werewolf of London. Now, when you read the caption on this video, Werewolf of London, my guess is at least some of you immediately thought, oh yeah, I saw that movie about the guy backpacking through Europe and then he's bitten. No. That's an American Werewolf in London. That's from 1981. That title was a play on a couple of different titles, including the title Werewolf of London and also An American in Paris. It was a title derived from this film, Werewolf of London. But this film is really not generally well known, at least by the general public. It's known by horror fans. But it's not like The Wolfman that, your average person on the street knows and may well have seen. But Werewolf of London is absolutely a very influential werewolf film. It's probably the most influential werewolf film there's ever been. Listen, if you enjoy classic monsters and vintage horror, check out my book series, the Mourner's Woods books. I'm self-published on Amazon. I've written a series of novels that take place in a haunted forest. And a completely new cast of characters in each book enters into this forbidden wilderness where they encounter ghosts, monsters, banshees, and other supernatural dangers. But invariably, the greatest danger any character faces is the friends who hiked here with them. My books, again, are the Mourner's Woods books. They're available on Amazon. I post a link in the description. My name is Paul Edwards. Thanks for spending some time reminiscing with me about Werewolf of London. I'll see you in Mourner's Woods.